Have you ever heard of a single flower bulb costing more than a house? No, I'm not kidding. This actually happened. Let's travel back in time to the 17th century Netherlands, during a period known as the Dutch Golden Age. This was a time of immense wealth, scientific discovery, and artistic genius. But it was also the setting for one of the most bizarre and fascinating economic events in history, the Tulip Mania. So, how did a simple flower become the object of such insane speculation? Tulips aren't even native to the Netherlands. They were originally imported from the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey, in the late 16th century. When they arrived, the Dutch were captivated. These weren't your average garden flowers. They came in vibrant, intense colors and patterns that no one in Europe had ever seen before. A botanist named Carolus Clusius was one of the first to cultivate tulips in the Netherlands. He planted a collection in the botanical gardens of Leiden University, and people were mesmerized. But Clusius wasn't keen on selling them. He was more interested in research. This scarcity only made the tulips more desirable. Soon, people started stealing bulbs from his garden at night. The tulip craze had begun. What really sent the market into a frenzy was a specific type of tulip. You see, some tulips were affected by a virus, the Tulip Breaking Virus. This virus didn't kill the plant, but it caused the petals to break into stunning, flame-like patterns of multiple colors. These broken tulips were incredibly rare and unpredictable. You could plant a solid-colored bulb and have no idea if it would bloom with these beautiful, intricate patterns. This unpredictability and rarity made them the ultimate luxury item. The most famous of these broken tulips had names like Viceroy and, the holy grail of them all, Semper Augustus. This particular bulb was legendary for its deep crimson flames on a pure white background. There were only a dozen or so Semper Augustus bulbs in existence, making them priceless. To own one was the ultimate status symbol, a way to show off your immense wealth and taste. At first, the tulip trade was for connoisseurs and wealthy merchants. But as prices started to rise, everyone wanted a piece of the action. People from all walks of life, weavers, farmers, blacksmiths, started investing their life savings into tulip bulbs. They weren't buying them to plant in their gardens. They were buying them with the hope of selling them for a higher price. This is what we call a speculative bubble. The market structure itself was unique. Since tulips only bloom in the spring, and you can't move the bulbs for most of the year, a futures market developed. People would sign contracts to buy bulbs at a set price at the end of the season. This meant you could buy and sell the rights to a tulip bulb without ever actually touching it. This abstract nature of the trade made it feel more like gambling than gardening, and it drew in even more speculators. Picture this. Deals weren't just made in formal exchanges. A lot of the trading happened in local taverns. Over a beer, people would trade contracts worth thousands of guilders. The atmosphere must have been electric, filled with hope and greed. Stories spread of fortunes being made overnight. A chimney sweep who made a lucky trade and retired a rich man. A farmer who sold his land to buy a single bulb. These tales, whether entirely true or not, fueled the fire. The prices reached absurd levels. At the peak of the mania, in the winter of 1636 to 1637, a single Semper Augustus bulb was said to have been sold for the price of a grand Amsterdam townhouse, complete with a coach and horses. Another famous story tells of a sailor who mistook a valuable Viceroy bulb for an onion and ate it with his herring. When the wealthy merchant discovered his priceless bulb was gone, he had the sailor thrown in jail. The value of this onion could have fed a whole ship's crew for a year. People were trading anything and everything for these bulbs: land, livestock, entire estates. The Dutch economy, it seemed, had gone completely mad for tulips. But as with all speculative bubbles, it couldn't last forever. The question wasn't if it would burst, but when. The crash came swiftly and brutally in February of 1637. It started at a routine bulb auction in the city of Haarlem. For the first time, buyers just didn't show up. The prices offered were so high that no one was willing to pay. Panic set in. Word spread like wildfire that the prices were falling. Everyone who had bought bulbs on credit, hoping to sell them for a profit, now desperately tried to offload them. But there were no buyers. The market simply evaporated overnight. People who thought they were millionaires one day woke up the next holding contracts for bulbs that were now worth a fraction of what they had paid, or even worse, were completely worthless. Fortunes were wiped out. People who had sold their homes and businesses were left with nothing but debt and a handful of flower bulbs. The aftermath was messy. The government tried to step in to settle the disputes, eventually offering to void contracts for a small fee, but the damage was done. Many people were financially ruined, and the trust in the market was shattered. For a long time, the word tulip became synonymous with foolishness and greed. So, was Tulip Mania really as crazy as it sounds? For centuries, the story has been told as a cautionary tale about the madness of crowds and the dangers of speculative bubbles. And it's true, it was an incredible period of speculation. However, some modern historians argue that the story has been exaggerated over time. They suggest that the financial ruin wasn't as widespread as the popular tales claim. They point out that much of the trade was happening on paper, between a relatively small group of wealthy merchants, and that many of the defaulted contracts were settled without causing widespread bankruptcy. They argue that the popular image of society-wide collapse was largely created by anti-speculation propaganda written after the crash. Regardless of the true scale of the financial devastation, Tulip Mania remains a powerful lesson. It shows how quickly markets can detach from reality, driven by human psychology, our hopes, our greed, and our fear of missing out. It was the first well-documented speculative bubble in history, but it certainly wasn't the last. From the South Sea bubble in the 18th century to the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s, and even to some of the speculative assets we see today, the patterns are strikingly similar. An exciting new thing appears, prices skyrocket based on the promise of future profits, and eventually, the bubble bursts, leaving many people with heavy losses. The story of the Dutch and their tulips is more than just a quirky historical footnote. It's a timeless reminder of the delicate balance between value and speculation, and the human tendency to get swept up in the madness of the crowd. It teaches us to be critical, to ask questions, and to remember that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. So the next time you see a beautiful tulip, remember its wild and crazy history. Remember the time when this simple flower was more valuable than gold, and when it brought a nation to the heights of speculative frenzy and then to the depths of financial despair. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey back in time interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from history. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to explore. See you in the next video.